Coming to you from the campus of Utah Tech University in St. George, Utah, this is 70 is the New 50, a podcast on how to be vigorously alive as we age. Creator Jan Graham Hunt is joined by her co-host Wendy King. And now, 70 is the New 50.
Well, hello and welcome everyone to 70's the New 50. I'm Jan Graham Hunt, creator and host. I'm a retired lawyer. I'm doing my best to savor the glorious freedom of retirement in this gorgeous southwest corner of Utah, blessed with stunning red rock, clean air, and sunny skies. Our mission with this podcast is to inspire others to live a fully engaged, vibrant, and meaningful life as we age. This is the second season of the podcast, and I'm happy to be joined by my co-host, Wendy King, who will host the next episode. One of the great joys of retirement is that we finally, at long last, have the time to follow our passions and interests. Our guest today has taken a notably bold step in that direction. He is looking at how we, as humans, think and manage the minefield of communicating with people we see as different from ourselves. And teaching a class here at Utah Tech University on this subject. Welcome, Rodney Dueck.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Rodney, I know you are a retired physician, an ophthalmologist, and a medical director for a huge medical practice and hospital in Minneapolis. And we could do a whole show on that. But I want to get right to this fascinating journey you're on now. You've said your experience gave you an up-close look at the soft underbelly of the human condition and made you curious about the vast potential of humans, which is sadly blocked by conflict and disagreement. Tell us about that personal journey for you.
It started probably from adolescence, but it culminated in my experience that I described to you. As a physician, I had the opportunity to witness and be a co-experiencer with patients and families dealing with very hard issues. And what I saw in that was great courage, often great wisdom in the face of pain, emotional and physical. I also saw it in the medical system that I was a part of, the nurses and physicians and including everyone else, but speaking specifically of them, care and what happens to patients matter. By and large, that was my experience. At the same time, as an institution, and in my case, as a member of the leadership team, conflict arises, different ideas about what does it mean to be a leader, and how do we serve our personal goals and needs and the interests of the institution and the interest of patients.
Sure.
And I saw many times that the differences and the conflict, different views of what it means to be a leader. For example, we had an executive team of all good people who cared about doing the right thing,
Sure.
For the right reasons. And yet, when it came to, what is the role of a leader, is it to control and direct? Is it to decide and convince or coerce others to follow the plan? Or is it to inspire? Is it to listen and understand the experience of the people who face the problems of life in an organization like that every day? And it was through that conflict and the dysfunction that I saw, kind of like Congress, but not so bad.
Right.
You can see the point where these differences undermine decision-making, undermine a sense of cooperation, and most of all, undermine the potential that we as individuals and we as an institution might have. And so it was the tension between what is possible and what was happening that that really motivated me to be interested in this question.
And these are situations where everyone arguably has the same goal,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And have the right values in terms of dedicating themselves to a final
Exactly.
goal, but they see the way there very differently, and maybe the default position is to dig in and invest in their own position or argument rather than remaining open. Would that be fair? Open to
Exactly.
a third possibility.
And this happens often unconsciously and typically under stress about money or about egoic, one's sense of agency and one's role in the organization and one's need for power or not.
Yes.
That all of these dynamics kind of feed into what goes well or what might not.
Right. And so coming out of your retirement, obviously these things had been playing heavily on your mind, and you kind of decided to dedicate yourself to this. You've made the statement that many of us, of course, when we retire, it's all about travel. Let's go see the world. Let's go see all these amazing places. And I know you and your wife have done that as well, but you have said that really lifelong learning remains dominant in your life. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's been true since I was in college. It is so enlivening and so capable of enlarging one's perspective and one's appreciation for life, our relationships, the beauty of nature. You can go on and on.
Well, I love that. I'm interested in it because, again, the premise of our podcast is how to live a really fully engaged and connected, and I would say meaningful life as we age. And we all love to travel, and we all love to play golf, or I play pickleball, or the sort of recreational side of that. But there's something else afoot that is arguably more important, and that is we're at maybe the last third of our life, and we want it to feel meaningful.
Yes, sure.
And that was the driving principle, I assume, for you in this.
An important factor, yeah.
Well, your class is called Navigating Our Evolving Consciousness here in the continued learning program at Utah Tech University, and I know the class is very popular. I also know we could spend hours talking about it, maybe days. But if you only had 5 minutes to describe the class, which happens to be true right here, we have about 5 minutes. And we'll get into some of the aspects of it, but how would you give an overall description of the class that has drawn so many people?
Well, the original title was, As a Species, Are We Up to the Challenges of Our Time? And that's how I started developing it in my mind. And it was really to look outward into the world and to face what is happening, both the good, both the potential and the difficulties, which are so obvious and pervasive. And so that was one aspect, and I wanted that understanding to serve as the context for a deeper inner conversation about our own lives. How do you live in this world? How do you make sense of what's going on? How do you sleep at night? How do you relate to your family and friends? How do you spend your money? How much travel do you do, and when? And what else? And so I'm just illustrating all the ways in which this inner journey is important. The other aspect of it is that our consciousness is changing all the time, whether we know it or whether we're willing to admit it to ourselves.
And that's in the title, Navigating Our Evolving Consciousness.
That is exactly. And to be aware of what's going on within and to have a map, if you will, because that's what this course was really about, is that to provide enough insight about what's happening right now in the world and what's happening to the consciousness of people, to see the map and what it looks like and see where you are and what's good and what's not so good or what's missing. And if you wish, because nothing changes unless we wish it or will it, it's not literally true, but it's very, very true in this sense. You can choose to grow up. The phrase that one author uses is to wake up, to grow up, to clean up, all the stuff, and to show up as an informed, deeply caring, constructive, not focused on conflict, but focused on creating a better future. Those are the phrases that I think illustrate my intention.
Right. And of course, you're teaching this class in a highly interesting context, not only in our country, but in the world, where we're getting further apart. Is that fair? Mm-hmm. Certainly in politics, where I remember, I'm old enough to remember when politics was a relatively friendly game, and Democrats and Republicans got along fairly well, and focus was really on the individual candidates and their goals for the future, not are you red or blue. And it's, I think, fair to say that devolution to those two default places has been a little destructive. Let's say enormously destructive for our country.
Sure.
How do you bring that reality and that context to your class and in your discussion? Do you address that directly?
Well, we're open to address anything a student cares about talking about. And so, yes, this has been an element of our conversation. I think first, it can be really helpful to deeply understand and face what is actually happening, how this polarization is undermining our capacity to make choices and take action to solve problems like, our children fearing going to school for fear an AK-47 may end up in their room and blow them to smithereens.
Right, and that's no longer an irrational fear, it's a rational fear.
Yes, and we at this point appear as a country, we spend $800 billion a year on, quote, defense, and yet we cannot protect our children from such things.
At home.
What's going on here? Why is this happening? That's what the course, why is this happening? And then how
does your
insight.
material address that? How does the course address that in terms of your curriculum?
I'd say the most fundamental way is that we look at the evolutionary history of consciousness for humans in the last, obviously we know very little about the early periods, but for the last 300,000 years, and certainly much more detailed in the historical time, the last 10 or 15,000 years. And there is a pattern of development and a very understandable series of stages of growth in the human psyche, in human consciousness, that helps to see why it's happening and understand maybe what we could do about it. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's accessible, and that's what I'm trying to do. Is just people are free to choose to do with it as they wish,
right.
But to have access to a way of thinking about, a way of understanding what's happening, to understand that the problems we're facing have been repeating themselves for centuries. We just have our modern version because of technology and all the power that we humans have developed. One of the first slides that I shared in the course was a graph that showed the power of human beings to affect the world around us, and it was very slow in changing over the tens of thousands of years in the past, but that acceleration of power has increased enormously. it used to be that it was, even in 1900, it was 100 years for all human knowledge to double. Now, every 12 to 13 months, all human knowledge doubles. And a year later, all that doubles. And
It's
a year
astounding.
later, all
It's
that
astounding.
doubles.
Yeah.
And for example, if you look up medical knowledge, how fast is that doubling? Well, I've tried it several times, 3 to 4 months. What's a doctor to do? What's a medical system to do?
Right.
How do you ensure or, provide the care? Or you see how it gets chaotic?
Yes, it's amazing. And also now we have, of course, the context of AI
Yes.
and that
Yes.
huge expansion of capacity.
Yes. It's just happening now.
Let me ask this question. If we're evolving, if we're getting better at this, why are we becoming more divided? Why are we hating each other more? That's probably the most pesky question I could ask you about this.
Well, there are several ways to answer that. There's a short answer, there's a 5-minute answer, a little longer, and then there's a conversation that would last for years.
And I'd love
And
to
so-
have that conversation. Let's go with the short answer
Okay.
and see if it helps us.
Humans, maybe I could best answer it by just going through that first tier process of development, because I think the answer will become evident in explaining it. Beginning about 15,000 years ago, after the indigenous cultures that we now recognize were focused on safety and security, had been functioning well for as many as 25 to 50,000 years, some people in those cultures decided, well, hey, we can just take things and there's nobody that'll stop us. We can
We don't need to
kill the
cooperate.
leaders. We can kill the leaders and take the women, take the valuables and enjoy them for ourselves. And this actually happened about 15,000 years ago on all the continents. Each story is its own story, but the bottom line was that by the time 10,000 years of this gradually developing, it was utter chaos. The amount of murder and mayhem and what have you, you just have to look even in the Bible and the numbers, I can't remember which it is, but they talk about the Midianites and how they slaughtered all the men and all the women except for those who were virgins, and they took everything, and it was just okay. That's the way you did things back then. But the great religions of the world, be they the Judeo-Christian tradition, Buddhism, Hinduism, all the religions of the East and West began to develop. It was called the axial period, in which this chaos was utterly unacceptable. And so a new way of thinking developed that was focused around order. It was focused around rules. It focused about a higher purpose, a supreme being that was the rule, the lawgiver, and that order had to be established, and people needed to behave, needed to mind what they're told. And so this movement is credited with the capacity of humans to form civilizations, because you could have thousands of people, thinking the same ideas, believing in the same system, working together to common purpose. And that continued till about 300 years ago when the Enlightenment occurred. And here, one of the problems with each of these developmental levels is that they go to excess. And so in the medieval period, people were being tortured and burned at the stake for having the wrong ideas, and even for suggesting that the sun was at the center of our solar system, or that other suns have planets revolving around them, and maybe people live there, or maybe there's living things there too. Okay. And Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake in 1600 in Rome for that kind of teaching. He did other things too, but that would be one of the main issues.
So I want to move to a question about your class that I'm fascinated with, and that is how we receive feedback as thinkers.
Yes.
But just to complete your point about how we have evolved but somehow have become more conflicted.
Okay. Well, I'll just say a word about the Enlightenment period, because then evidence became the source of knowledge instead of sacred text. So there were ways of understanding the world that made it possible to recognize the sun was at the center of our solar system.
I
But
see.
the point that I want to make is that all of these stages of development persist in our present world. There are still predators, whether they are drug cartels, street gangs, predatory capital. Politicians are drawn to this because they're drawn to power and control. So you see how we can find in our society all kinds of examples. The authoritarian world is very much associated with the narcissistic or egocentric world and with the ethnocentric world. And we're in a battle between authoritarianism and democracy. Well, democracy became viable when the Enlightenment started to think of all people, not just all Christians or all Buddhists or all this or all that. And so by seeing the world in a larger whole, a new idea, democracy became possible. Well, people who have been running the show for thousands of years, this is very threatening. And to be able to change your thinking enough to accept this new way is very hard. And so it's a battle between the stages. The residue of the past is with us.
So we're evolving,
Yes,
but those dynamics, those conflicts are ever present.
absolutely.
And is this fair to say that it is our choice, what we choose, how we choose to proceed and choose those, and that's really what your class is about.
Right.
All
It is our choice. One of the sad things is that often we don't realize it's our choice, or we do not understand how it could be a choice.
Or we maybe don't take responsibility for
Right.
making the choice.
Yes, or we just can't see it.
Sure.
The knowing about these things as opposed to embodying them, being a living expression of them, is what matters. And that's a very difficult thing for humans. And there are 3 or 4 levels beyond what I've described to you, involving capacities to deal with the complexity of the world in which we live. And that was really the aim of all of this explanation I'm touching on now.
Yes. I know that something happened with the class that is very unusual. First of all, it was a large class, and many of the students, maybe half, opted to continue the class, or the class discussion is on Zoom, after the semester ended. And I have been around a long time, and I'm not sure that's ever happened. So what do you think about the class touched these individuals and made it so they really wanted more? I mean, is it a sense of their own evolution, their sense of hope has been triggered? What was your perception of that? Because that is very unusual.
I think both of those that you mentioned apply. One of the participants suggested it, and so we just said, let us know if you're interested. And about, I think there were a total of 13 said yes. And there were about 25 to 28 who participated at some point, or really most of those all of the time. I think that there is a hunger for serious conversation about things that matter, for conversation that is safe,
Yes.
that is respectful, that is open, that is honest, that is transparent.
And for the people in your class, would you say there's a fairly good diversity of opinion there? So everyone didn't come in all agreeing and seeing it the same way? And there's maybe a process of, I used to see you over there across the classroom as someone different from me and an enemy, and I have figured out how to talk to you about things we both care about?
There's some subtlety here. The answer to your question, was there difference? Yes. In this discussion group, are there differences of perspective? Yes. Do we handle them in healthy ways? My sense is we're doing a reasonable job, enough so that The enthusiasm continues. At least we've gone now for 6 weeks, 3 sessions.
Has there been a sign of anger or conflict or expression of that? I mean, that's a very human way to respond to these things, and so it wouldn't be surprising if that happened. But
well, one of the things I tried to emphasize during the course is that we speak about these things, that people can ask any question about anything. We'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. And so there wasn't a lot of anger. It was expressed more thoughtfully in more potentially constructive ways. One of the dilemmas of this course and of this situation is that the folks that I have described so far generally are not interested in this, are not necessarily drawn to it, and find it maybe threatening.
Sure.
And so I think there's a huge amount of self-selection in terms of who signs up.
So if you're willing to take this class, you've already crossed a little bit of a barrier there to say, I'm willing to talk about the way I think. I'm willing to look at the way I think and make decisions. And that's huge, isn't it?
And to listen.
And to listen
the way
to others.
You think.
Right.
And be willing to be changed by what you hear. Just think of that. How willing are people to be changed by what they hear? By feeling able to be honest and not be afraid or not. One of the things I'm very interested in is facilitating conversations in a way that honesty can flourish without fear. And if things get out of hand, I don't mind that one bit.
Right, that's just
I can
honest.
use it as a teaching opportunity.
Yes. Sure.
Here's what's happening. This is what's said. This is how it feels.
That's wonderful.
Let's just be aware of that.
Yeah. Well, I'm a retired litigator, and this resonates with me as what we tell juries. Mm-hmm. You'll all have different opinions as you walk in the room today, but we're going to agree to a higher process, and that is we're going to look at what the evidence says and be open to maybe changing or at least talking about or changing our opinion, and to do so honestly for a higher good, which is a just result. So I think that's fascinating. Well, Rodney, the premise of this podcast is how to live a fully engaged life as we age. Mm-hmm. May I ask your age?
80.
And what would you care to share with our listeners as we close out here about at age 80, the young age of 80, how and why you've been able to infuse the aging process in your life with such energy?
Mm. Well, it's an interesting question because there could be things I'm not even aware of that are really important, but I can tell you the ones that I'm aware of. I think one of them is to be curious, to be interested and curious, and as I just alluded to earlier, to be willing to be affected by what you see, what you learn. And I mentioned, we spoke of a lifelong continued learning as a feature of an active mind, being challenged by things you may or may not agree with or may or may not understand, to understand the complexity of life and to not be disturbed by that. But getting to the heart of the matter is to be innocently curious, to be open, to be available to understanding all of the messiness of the world, both the good, the potential, and the dark side, to be open to all of it. And to choose love. Choose to care about doing the right thing. Choose about creating a better future. It's very easy to be discouraged and frustrated, and sometimes I am. I'm not always constructive in every moment of my life, but
you've made a decision to be guided by choosing love.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine a better place to end this discussion. Rodney, I want to thank you so much for being an inspiration to all of us with your class and really just the way you've lived your life. And I hope we can do a follow-up episode and explore the concepts of the class more meaningfully.
Sure.
But this has been a good start, and I hope
Okay.
you'll come back.
Thank you.
So, dear listeners, thank you so much for joining us, and please watch for our next episode, which will be hosted by my co-host, Wendy King. And as they say in France, à la prochaine. Until next time, on 70 is the new 50.
Thank you for joining us on 70 is the new 50. Don't miss future episodes for inspiring and eye-opening discussions about living a fully engaged life as we age. We'll see you next time on 70 is the new 50. This has been a production from a podcast studio.